the hall situated at 7 to 9 Reading Road and the adjacent sheltered housing, as shown on its drawings of October last year. Following a site visit, your senior highways engineer reported it soon became evident that we will need to provide a right lane into the entrance to avoid conflicts, and probably the same for the sheltered housing next door. This would aim to shelter right turners from oncoming traffic. Members, there have been at least 3 accidents at that location since that time, to my knowledge. The hall is regularly used of an evening, but also during the day by NHS assisting those with respiratory issues, those recovering from heart surgery, and mothers attending infant sensory sessions. We estimate there's at least 21,000 movements in and out of the hall, 3,500 being infants. Any vehicle turning right into the hall and subject of a side impact would place an infant in direct line of contact. There is risk there, and this is highway.
You're out of time, sir.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank Councillor Bowring for his assistance and also your senior highway engineer. Thank you.
Thank you. And my apologies, I failed to introduce you by name, sir. Just a bit, my apologies. Okay. Now at this point, members, the public questions are finished, the petitions are finished. I see no others in the room, no other petitions, no. And so members of the public are able to leave if they wish to leave. We don't want to join in the rest of the fun for the evening.
Too much excitement.
Oh, I know. Come again.
We will.
Okay, thank you very much, members, and well done. We just got it inside, so that was well done to everybody. Okay, well we move now to the presentation by the Chief Constable, who has sat there patiently listening to those very interesting questions, and I thank you for that, and I thank his colleagues as well for their time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I think the best thing I could do is hand over to the Chief Constable, Francis Hapgood. Well, I'll hand over to you both.
Thank you very much.
And if you'd like to make a presentation, then they've got a few questions for you.
I'll kick off with the PCC presentation, if I may. And I think there's one question already been submitted, and then the Chief Constable will go on with a much more interesting presentation on operational matters. No. Thank you. There's a few statistics here. We can circulate the presentation for you. Want to look at these in more detail. You'll see from these numbers that crime is sadly on the increase. That is the situation across the country. If you look historically, though, across the Thames Valley, crime is significantly lower than 5 years ago and even lower than it was 10 years ago. We are at a historic low. The increase is not so that we take lightly, and Francis and his colleagues are taking that matter very seriously. There are a number of initiatives to try and drive that down in particular areas. But we have to look at context, and I'll show you some figures in a moment of how Thames Valley compares with the rest of the country. Thames Valley received a good rating from HMIC in its latest inspection. Another inspection due to begin shortly and constantly being inspected. But the results of that continue to be good. And I think just as good as the official inspection is that last statistic there, which is victim satisfaction, which is particularly high. I think it's worth noting that it's not on there. We have equally high ratings, particularly when it comes to rape victims. A particular cohort we've been taking very seriously about how the police deal with them, and there have been a lot of concerns historically across the country about how police forces deal with victims of rape. And the statistics around victim satisfaction about the way the police are able to treat them and gather evidence and follow them through the criminal justice system are very encouraging. That again, so we can circulate these for those of you who can't make that out, but the little green, so the little yellow bar to the left and a little slightly further to the right on the second chart shows where Thames Valley compares to the rest of the country. So in terms of reducing violence, we're significantly down the bottom end, and burglary, which has been on the increase again across the country, And we've seen an increase in Thames Valley, although I'm pleased to say here in this local area, the increase is well below the force average. Thames Valley still performs incredibly well and actually is in a better position than it was at this time last year. So I think we need to look at the reality of this increase in crime in the context of what's happening across the country. A few other statistics I won't bore you with at any great length. They refer to particular crime types that have increased and offer some explanation for them. For example, homicides increased by 5.6%. That looks like a very alarming increase, and whilst it's the most serious of crimes, a number of those deaths relate to the deaths at Didcot Power Station last year. So there are some anomalies that explain some of those increases. This is just an extract from the Police and Crime Plan, which I think is an interesting one. It shows graphically the area that Thames Valley covers and the resources that are available. I think the most fascinating statistic for me when I first saw this is on the right-hand side under demand, that only 20% of calls to the police actually relate to crime. There's a huge demand out there. Yes, some of that is resource of things that the police have always dealt with and will always deal with, but an awful lot of it is shift of demand from other public services, and the first place that the public call is the police. That demand has been growing exponentially across the country. Over the summer we've seen a huge spike, not just in Thames Valley, but across the country, and it seems that, it's referred to as a spike, it doesn't seem to be going down anytime soon. So there's a big demand there that Thames Valley having to deal with. If you look, the figures in the top right show the number of calls to 999 and 101, over 1.2 million calls last year. A vast number that are being dealt with, and say a relatively small proportion of those relate to the crimes that many people would expect the police to be dealing with. Over the summer months, the performance of the 101 number deteriorated, but as I'm sure Francis will be able to refer to later, that has picked up significantly now, and I think the vast majority of calls are now being answered within a minute. And we still encourage people to call that number to report crime and to report intelligence. But it's important that number is working effectively, because otherwise we do see a shift of people. If they don't get the response they want on a non-emergency number, they will simply ring 999, and that puts even more pressure on resources. I'll quickly skip through these. This relates to the survey that was done in drawing up the Police and Crime Plan, which has now been put in place. 3,500 adults. Go on to the next slide, you see how we can try to engage with young people between the ages of 11 and 17. As you will know from your experience in the council, a particularly difficult cohort to engage with. But you can see how the different age groups, different sections of the population have different concerns over crime. And that's led us to the strategic priorities for the Thames Valley, which is set out in the Police and Crime Plans 2021. Vulnerability, the dark area you can't read very well, is prevention and early intervention, reducing reoffending, serious organised crime and terrorism, and police ethics and reform. And those are the strategic areas that the Chief Constable is tasked with carrying out, and that from that forms the Chief Constable's delivery plan, which then, as we stand for myself, holds the Chief Constable and the Senior Management Team to account on. I'll happily try and deal with any questions there may be, although you may want to, once you've seen the Chief Constable's presentation. There was one in particular that was submitted in advance from Councillor Ross about the ambitions or otherwise of the PCC with regard to the new powers or the new duties to collaborate brought about by the Police and Crime Act earlier this year, which allow the Police and Crime Commissioner to put forward a business case to become the Police and Crime and Fire Commissioner and to take on responsibilities for fire service in Thames Valley. We've made very clear that that is not the intention at the moment for Thames Valley. We're working very collaboratively with the Berkshire Fire Service, also Buckinghamshire, Milton Keynes and Oxfordshire. Councillor Ross and I were at a meeting earlier this week at Oxfordshire Fire HQ looking at areas that we can enhance collaboration. Already we've seen in Berkshire, at Hungerford, a very good example where there is a new community fire station which houses all three of the blue light services and has been welcomed in that community. We're looking at more opportunities like that, as well as operational collaboration. Going forward in the future, I think a lot of people can see further governance collaboration of blue light services being a sensible way forward, But where we are in Thames Valley at the moment, the importance is delivering collaboration on the ground to ensure that we've got the operational working of the fire service and the police particularly, but also trying to involve the ambulance service in that. So that's where the focus is. And I think everybody accepts that paying attention to the governance structures at this stage will be a diversion from the important work on collaboration that can really benefit public safety.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for welcoming me again to this evening. Great to be back here again. Let me introduce Sean Virtue, who is the ULPA commander for this area. ULPA commander for this area. He's been here since June, so is already an expert and will be able to deal with any of your difficult local questions.
No pressure.
No pressure. But just picking up on some of the things that have happened over the last few months, as the Deputy PCC said, it's been really busy over the summer months. Been busy in terms of the numbers of calls coming into not just policing, actually other blue light services. The ambulance service has seen a significant increase as well over this period. We've seen an increase in crime, as has been mentioned already, and I'll go on to talk about some of the local things in a minute. But actually, the big increase in calls coming in has been more around fear for welfare, suspicious circumstances, and I think some of that might be down to what else was happening around May, June, and that feeling of uncertainty in our communities. And I'll touch on the terrorist incidents in a minute. But also a big increase in terms of calls relating to mental health. We are certainly doing a lot of work now to really understand what is happening there, whether those calls are calls that should be coming into the police service or should be going to other organisations. So that understanding of demand and what we can do to reduce is really, really important. In terms of terrorism, I probably talked last year about it's not a case of if, it's a case of when something happens, but I don't think any of us would have expected what we saw over May and June time with the terrible incidents in London and also in Manchester, and then the more recent incident again in London. I think everybody would agree, though, that the response to those incidents has been fantastic by the emergency services, by the police, the ambulance service, by the fire service, and the members of the public who were at the scene. And a lot of that was down to the training that happened beforehand by all of us to prepare for those sorts of incidents. But it's also about then, now what do we do? Because there is a step change in terms of the activity that we need to do across the country in terms of not just dealing with those serious incidents, and you can see again the aftermath, the number of people being arrested, the number of resources that are going into investigating the most recent incident, but actually there's also the work that we're doing to disrupt a lot of the ongoing plots, and we have been very successful at disrupting a number of plots around the country. But it's also about thinking about the work we do at a very local level in terms of preventing radicalisation. And again, there's lots of work that is going on across Thames Valley as well as across the rest of the country. So as well as those as well as the increase, sorry, can I turn this on? As well as the increase in demand and as well as the terrorist incidents, we've also seen a number of serious incidents happening. We've had a number of murders, fortunately not in this area, but in June, as well as all of that increase in the terrorist incidents, we saw a number of murders taking place, which again had an impact on our resourcing. And of course, we've also had some tragic incidents on our road network. Again, fortunately not here, but you'll probably have seen the coverage about the fatal accident up on the M1 near Newport Pagnell, where sadly 8 people lost their lives. So it's been a really busy time in terms of what's been going on. But our commitment, as I mentioned last time, is to work together to make our community safer. And it's very much about what we're doing, not just with partners, and you are key partners, but it's also about what we do with our communities. And increasingly, it's about how we work together to try and build community resilience, so the members of the public are more able to deal with some of the things that possibly in the past they might have turned automatically to public services to deal with. And actually, we're not going to be able to deal with our capacity in the same way. And equally, actually, there's a lot that people can do to keep themselves safe in terms of community safety issues. So just in terms of some of the local issues, and I'm going to go through the commitment that we made. The first is that we are an emergency service, so when people need our help, we will respond. And when things do happen, we will work to investigate those cases. We have seen a significant increase in burglary across the country. Actually, your increase is much smaller and from a very low base level. You should know already that Woking, well you do know already, Woking is a very safe place to live and work, and it continues to be a very safe place to live and work. When you look at your comparison with Woking Borough Council with others in the most similar family, you're at the top of all of them. I think for all crime you're second. I can't remember who you're second to, but you're second, so that's a good place to be. Your violence levels have gone down over the last year against, again, a national trend of violence going up, down by about 10%, which is really unusual. I think that's, again, some of the work that you've been doing, which I'll touch on later on. Just in terms of the burglaries, I thought you might be interested. I mean, there aren't many trends, actually. We had one where there was a bit of a series happening. I can't say it's definitely linked, but the recall of a couple of individuals who we were targeting back into prison saw that series stopped. Unfortunately, we weren't able to convict them for any of them, but it seemed to stop, and that's a bit more than a coincidence. But most of the burglaries that are happening, or many of them, actually are not into houses, they're into outbuildings, sheds, garages. So the items that are going are generally smaller sorts of items. But some of the work we have been doing, you might have heard about drugs lines coming into communities around the Thames Valley, but also wider than that, where they are setting up a drugs business, effectively, from vulnerable people's houses. You don't have major issues around that, but when you did have, and one was around the sort of potential in the Norris estate, actually what was really good work was the intelligence and information coming in from the schools about the potential exploitation. Working really closely with your children's social care meant that actually that was got on top of really quickly. And it's that combined approach, using enforcement, sometimes actually using offences around money laundering and making sure that we seize people's asset, but also most importantly is a wrap around the most vulnerable people who are being exploited. That's really key. And I'm pleased about the relationship you've got between the police and children's social care and that in relation to that. Another one that has come up on an annual basis, of course, is the new wave of the population for Reading University. Again, successful in terms of that education, working closely with the security and others at the university to make sure that the next set of generally young people are not victims of crime there. Moving on to the problem solving, and I think again last time I talked about the investment in neighbourhood policing, and you probably heard about the erosion of neighbourhood policing around the rest of the country. What we have done is made sure that there are single points of contact, either police officers or PCSOs, and they're probably the people that you see mostly are there, but also we have problem solving teams, and those problem solving teams are there to support the PCSOs and the neighbourhood officers to deal with the more intractable problems. And they work really closely with other partners, whether it's the council, housing associations. And there are some examples up there around Winnish, and I was just talking to the PCSOs who work in Winnish before we came here. They were talking about the work that they had done with some of the PCs to actually work with the housing association and the borough council to identify those people who were causing a bit of a misery for some of the residents there, to actually impose acceptable behaviour contracts on the residents, and if they are not complying with those contracts, then we look at eviction. So some good examples there. Interesting, the question earlier on about speeding. Community Speed Watch is a really effective way of involving local residents in that particular problem. If it then is found that there is a problem, then we can escalate it, and then we can do enforcement as well. But that has been successful in a couple of areas here in Finchampstead and also in Alderfield where that's been good. In terms of engagement, we have neighbourhood action groups in some areas, but we also use community forums. Many of those are councillor-led, and that's a good way of engaging with our local communities to understand what's happened. And then lastly, Darum. I think I talked about this last time. Again, it was fairly early days, but the Darum is a really effective way of the standard and medium risk domestic abuse victims and perpetrators being dealt with, and making sure that we can break that cycle of offending. And you have a low repeat victimisation rate for domestic abuse, which is something you should be proud of. I'm not going to say too much about this. We're investing significantly in technology because actually it means that we can be out on the streets much more than having to come back to police stations. and also it means that the public can contact us in different sorts of ways. So technology will be key to being able to deal with the financial pressures that we are facing at the moment. But also investing in our people effectively as well to make sure that they have the right skills to be able to deal with the new challenges that are coming upon us. And there are some other opportunities about how we bring people into the organisation, and I guess you're probably looking at apprenticeship schemes across the council area in the same way that we are increasing. So those are our priorities. I think last time I talked about the middle bit, which is around vulnerable members of our community who might be susceptible to, and all the abbreviations, I apologise for those, child sexual exploitation, forced female genital mutilation, honour-based abuse and forced marriage. And just one interesting story to tell you. Last week I was out on patrol in Wokingham actually with some of the officers here, spent the day, and we went to an address who we thought it was domestic abuse, but actually we rescued a woman from that address who, whether it was forced marriage or a very, very, very arranged marriage, which sounded a bit like a forced marriage, certainly a victim of coercive control, a victim of abuse, and we were able to rescue her and place her in suitable accommodation. But that was somebody in Wokingham, and I think one of the issues we really need to be aware of is how we spot the signs collectively when our officers are going into addresses about who might need support and might not be as well connected. Fortunately, this woman had contacted us, but actually, in a way, I was quite surprised that she had the courage to be able to contact us, given that she had only been in the country for a relatively short period of time. So we really need to look out for the most vulnerable members of our society to make sure we can put that wraparound care and actually protect them into the future. I'll move on to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. Okay, we have a number of questions for the Chief Constable and Deputy Police Crime Commissioner. So first of all, can I start off with Richard Delinsky?
I had it ready.
So I asked.
Shall I come
No,
back?
that's right, I've got it. Pretty quick. Yeah, a lot of board experiences, regular incidences of drug dealing which have been reported to the police. However, there's a growing sense of police inaction. What can the police do to restore the confidence amongst residents, and what can the local members do to help our neighbourhood team building relationships?
Thank you, Richard.
And I think you've already had a conversation with Sean about this answer, but I'm something wrong with this one.
Try the other one, it's fine.
So the first thing is when people give us information, clearly we have to corroborate some of that. So it might be intelligence or information, but we need to be able to make sure that we can act upon it. But we would encourage people to feed through information around drug dealing or any issues like that. I think our issue is we have been doing some things, and I've touched on some of them already. We have been making arrests. We also have been doing focus patrols. I think what we can be better at, and Sean actually highlighted this, is probably actually giving the feedback. So we need to be pushing out that feedback when we have been doing things and making sure that then we sort of say that what we have done, but also then we encourage other people to come forward with more information.
Thank you very much. Mr. Angus Ross, Councillor Ross.
Mr. Mayor, my question had been covered by the Deputy
Right,
Police Commissioner.
thank you very much. Philip Mervyn in the house? He's not here? Yeah, very well. So? Okay, Chief Constable, we don't have Mr. Murphy here, he's usually vanished, but if you'd like to take that question, I'm sure you would. Perhaps you would do so. Thank you.
The question is basically about footage regarding bad driving. There is a way that people can upload footage of bad driving. People